Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. I have the great privilege and honor today of being with the single individual who has known me longer than any other person alive today on the planet, my younger sister, Pamela Fedderson, who's 15 months younger than I am. Welcome, Pamela.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to actually have you in the studio now that we've already done a program with Andrew. You live in Vancouver, Washington, and you're a grandmother. You have 2 grandchildren. Let's talk about, and 2 children, both married. Let's talk about our life for a little bit. Growing up, we grew up in Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, a small town in the Midwest in the 1950s. What is your salient memory of growing up in Fond du Lac?
Safety. It was very safe.
We never locked the doors.
We didn't own a key.
Yeah.
It was very safe. It was very bucolic.
What does bucolic mean?
Beautiful. Beautiful rolling hills, farmland. It was very, you could encompass it very easily. It was somewhat pedestrian. My mother being from New York, she wasn't really raised in New York, but she considered herself a New Yorker.
She lived largely in Bayonne, New Jersey, right across the Hudson River, probably closer to Manhattan than people living in Brooklyn.
And she used to say, once a New Yorker, always a New Yorker. So she instilled in us a somewhat elitist view of Fond du Lac, like she was stuck there. In retrospect, years later when I went back to visit, I thought to myself, this is like heaven. This is like Leave It to Beaver. It was like the most ideal place you could ever grow up.
Well, there was something about Fond du Lac in the 1950s that was sort of right out of Norman Rockwell.
Right out of Norman Rockwell. And I actually think we had some family dynamics that were difficult, but I think in many ways it was a lovely childhood.
Since you brought up our mother, who died in 2011 at the age of 90, who was raised in New Jersey, as we pointed out, and had a passion for theater. I know you miss her a lot.
I do.
In fact, I think of you as being very much in her mold.
Yes.
And the funny thing is, I think you resisted that.
Do you think?
Well, sometimes you would be, for example, she was so dramatic and theatrical, and I think you resisted her dramatizing all sorts of situations.
Possibly.
Yeah.
My mother was eccentric, filled with love, serene, unusual, poetic, super smart, one of a kind. She was like no one else. She didn't resemble any kind of 50s housemaker. She was also opinionated, political. She's my shining star. And she couldn't have been more loving to me. You could do no wrong.
Well, that's the thing I remember about her most is that she was just totally loving. I think the one thing I can say about growing up as we did in Fond du Lac, there was never a moment of doubt that we were loved.
Never. My mother, I can't remember her criticizing me. She was effusive in her support and her compliments.
Extremely positive.
Of almost a Pollyanna.
Yeah.
Very much. She was named Rose, and she saw the world through rose-colored glasses.
You could say that about her, but it was such an endearing.
Very endearing. Very endearing. I miss her every day.
Yeah.
I feel her presence, almost like I can smell her. I can feel her voice. Her physicality is very much with me.
Our father was, as you might expect, fathers and mothers, he was in a lot of ways the opposite of her. His temperament was very different from hers.
Yes. Jeffrey sailed above everything. Jeffrey was very Buddha-like and sailed against any conflict. But my father was very tempestuous, had a hair-trigger temper, exceedingly effusive and loving. But his temper was frightening. And, I mean, he didn't use any physical harm against us, but he was very explosive. And Jeffrey just sailed above it. But I was very confrontational, so I butt heads with him.
You did. You butted heads with him quite a bit. At the same time, I remember you were like his favorite. You sat next to him as a young child. You would sit at his right side at the dinner table. Mother would sit at his left. I would sit next to Mother. And he loved to have a glass of beer when he came home for dinner in the evening. He was very hardworking. I would say he was a workaholic. As a small entrepreneur running a furniture store that was open evenings and weekends, he worked constantly. But when he came home for dinner, he'd have a glass of beer and he'd let you have a little sip of his glass.
And I never became addicted to alcohol, amazingly.
Yeah.
No, he had a very effusive, ebullient, very personable, very funny. So he was, he was bipolar.
Yeah,
he was possibly be diagnosed as bipolar. So he had both sides.
He was certainly never diagnosed.
No, he was never diagnosed. But in retrospect, he was, my mother was Jeffrey very much has my mother's temperament.
I do. I think I inherited her even temper, and you inherited Dad's. And our brother Andrew, who has been on New Thinking Aloud, had more of the temperament from the Mishlove side of the family.
And as I get older, I get more like Jeffrey. I have been that bombastic quality has left me long ago.
Well, you developed basically a career in fine art.
Mm-hmm.
You got a master's degree in stage design. Was it stage and costume?
Mm-hmm.
Stage design and costume design at UCLA, which must have been one of the foremost theater schools in the world.
Mm-hmm. No, it was an extraordinary experience. I was exposed to some of the most talented, giving. I considered it an honor every day just to rub shoulders with the people there. The professors were just exemplary people, and their skills were monumental. So I pinched myself because I was there. I always felt honored to be in the program. It was a very small group. There were 8 of us. 2 in set design, 2 in costume, 2 in lighting, 2... I can't remember this. It was an extraordinary, very intense, very difficult, probably the most difficult thing I've ever done.
I know you, while you were in college at UCLA, you worked on productions that were college productions. Mm-hmm. But then after you graduated, you moved out of the theatrical world. You never really pursued a career in stage design or costume design after you graduated, no, but you did work in the fine arts.
Mm-hmm.
Had a show in New York at one time.
Mm-hmm. I did all the windows of Neiman Marcus with my sculptures. I had a number of shows. I was in a number of books. And I taught art for 12 years.
Mm-hmm. So you're sort of passing interest in theater, I guess, was part of our upbringing. We didn't really mention it, but Mom, I think if she hadn't married my dad, our father, and moved to Wisconsin, she would have stayed in New York and probably ended up on Broadway doing theater. Because when she got to Wisconsin, practically as soon as she could, once the kids were like old enough that she could leave us, she got involved in community theater, and not just that, professional summer stock theater as well. So theater was a big part of our lives growing up.
Absolutely.
She starred in any number of performances.
And the whole family, except for you.
Except for me. That's
we're in a
right.
theater production.
You were in Bye Bye Birdie, wasn't that? Yeah. She got Dad involved in theater, and but not Andrew.
No, not Andrew, not you.
Not Andrew and not me. But theater was like sort of in the DNA of the family.
Absolutely. The arts.
Yeah. And at the same time, when Dad wasn't occasionally engaging in theater, he was a workaholic. He was constantly focused on business.
Constantly.
So that was our background. But we were in high school together.
We were.
We had some classes.
You were
together.
my cohort. I have deep and loving memories of growing up with Jeffrey. It was an honor. He was very mischievous, very impish, very curious, intense curiosity about the sciences, about life. And I admired him growing up. And we fought.
Occasionally.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes as little kids, we fought a lot. As kids sometimes do. But no, you're the joy of my life.
And vice versa.
What else shall we talk about?
Having children.
Okay, yes. Yeah, now that's an experience. I have never had the experience of having a baby. When I married Janelle, Lewis was already 9.5 years old, nearly 10. So that my experience of raising children started with a 10-year-old who's still living in the household now. He's 54. But you had two.
I had two children. I had my first at 39, my second at 40, and I had had a very full life before. So all I wanted to do was experience those children. I didn't have other things on my plate. Although I was working full time, and we were very lucky to have full-time help. It's like a trip around the world every day. I thought it was the greatest adventure in life. I can't think of anything more spectacular.
You watched them from babies to growing up and getting married, and
it was like being a kid again too, because you got to do all the same projects and play with the same toys. And my kids had much more affluent childhoods than I did, so I got to play with all these unusual toys with them, and I enjoyed. It was the highlight of my life.
I have to admit, that's the one thing I hardly understand at all, is being a mother, giving birth. I've never even been with a woman giving birth.
And then, of course, now I have two grandsons. Yeah. And being a grandparent is very psychedelic. You do not need to alter your reality to feel as if you have an altered reality. The sense of wonderment with grandchildren is consistent and constant and never ending, more so than having children, because you're not responsible, you're not caught up in the next meal, the next diaper. But it is, in terms of a spiritual experience, there's nothing that comes close. You are in a state of amazement.
Well, you know, one thing that I'm sure our viewers will be wondering is, what do you think of Jeffrey's interest in parapsychology? And I know that we butted heads on that many, many a time. Your attitude towards life is largely logical, rational, and I would say tends towards materialist.
I think that's accurate. I feel that life is so miraculous. I don't like to take mood-altering drugs myself, or mood-altering substances, because I feel like I live in a state of wonderment, visual, auditory wonderment. So I don't feel like I need an out-of-body experience or thinking past this moment to feel a sense of mysticism. I feel a sense of mysticism all the time by the material world. So I do disagree with Jeffrey on a number of topics, and we've learned not to butt heads on it. But I admire greatly Jeffrey's dedication to it and the fact that he takes a scientific approach to the unknown. His conclusions are different than mine, but it is consistent with his interest since he was a young boy. So it doesn't seem artificial. It seems like a complete natural evolution of who he is. And it goes along with who he is. Jeffrey is the most loving person I've ever met. And I will think about my mother as she grew older. She had some dementia. And I would, as many people do, grow impatient with someone who has dementia. They repeat themselves over and over. They'll ask the same question many times. And Jeffrey's patience knew no bounds. He never lost his temper or grew impatient with my mother. And he's a real example of that. So I have nothing but admiration for Jeffrey and the people who listen to him in his growing fan base and his awards. I'm infinitely proud of him, infinitely proud. And his recent award that he won is just the light of our life. It's a culmination of his dedication and steadfastness to his interests. But Jeffrey also has a keen interest in the hard sciences too, which we share. So we share so much that those areas that we disagree on are minimal.
You've been talking about me in the third person.
I'm talking to the audience.
Yeah,
he's still there.
Well, now, many of the viewers will have met Andrew. Mm-hmm. In fact, there's a video with Andrew was done just about a month ago. He was part of one of our live stream events. And for anyone who's interested, I can link. You put a hot link. If you have a computer that can pick up the hot link, it'll take you right to the live stream with our little brother, Andrew. Mm-hmm. He's 8 years younger than me. He's 7 years younger than you, roughly. Mm-hmm. What do you think of his career?
Oh, I'm so proud of him. I'm just beaming with pride, and I adore Andrew. And Andrew and Jeffrey, in terms of temperament, are polar opposites. In terms of interest, they're very similar. They're both voraciously curious, as my mother was. Mm. And but they look similar. I'd say they have some physical features, but personalities are diametrically opposed. He is extremely bombastic, the opposite, I would say, of calm, and very, very magnanimous and very loving. And I feel I adore him. You know, his accomplishments are very impressive.
Here's something that comes to mind. You were a bit of a rebel as a child with regard to religion. Mm-hmm. I got my bar mitzvah. I had religious training. And to be honest, I would say that growing up in a Jewish household, there are many things that favor a male child, especially the firstborn male child. But I recall at a time when I was still really into religion, you were definitely rebelling against it. At an early age.
A very early age. And I've been fairly consistent in my philosophical views, I would have to say. But Culturally, I'm now married to someone who's Jewish. I feel more imbued with Judaism than ever. But I guess I could call myself an atheist slash agnostic.
Mm-hmm.
And that is consistent since being a toddler, I guess.
Is that right? That long?
Yes, I definitely.
I recall you as a teenager just saying you were convinced the religions are created by man, not by God.
Oh, I still feel that way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You know, although, you know, when I do some volunteer work, and I'm dealing with some very old people who are housebound and have had quite a lot of adversity in their life. And I always congratulate them on their religion and tell them how wonderful it is. And I see the solace it gives them. So I'm much less negative about the place of religion in the world, as I see how difficult life is for so many people, that the comfort it gives people is very real and very solid and not a negative thing.
Well, you've had tragedy in your life.
Mm-hmm, I have, but I do feel like I've had an extremely happy life.
Mm-hmm.
Very happy. The adversity seems very minor compared to the glory.
Well, if you wanted to, since this is a new experience for you being interviewed on, and there's an audience out there, what would you want to leave with the audience if you had some final thoughts to share?
Wow. Well, one of the issues that I have with parapsychology is I think it's a very legitimate area of investigation, being open to other things. I just don't like to see it slip into that sort of thinking, which leads to conspiracy thinking. You know, sometimes I think it can be a slippery slope, starting to believe things which can. That's my biggest objection to it. That's one thing. But I would also say the thing I feel most as I've gotten older is family ties. Just the great joy I get from having Jeffrey and Andy in my world. I would say that's the greatest joy of life, and my children and my grandchildren. And I haven't talked very much about being an artist. So I'm an active artist now, which is a great way to get into the flow and have time absolutely disappear. So I feel blessed that I have that. And that's from early childhood, from as long as I can remember. But it's also very competitive.
Yeah. Well, you know what I'd like to do? If you give me some of your slides of your artwork, we'll show with the video some of your artwork. I know you've gone through different phases as an artist, from stuffed sculptures to watercolors to what do you do? You want to talk about what you're currently doing? Pillows at one time.
Yeah. Well, I had a business making pillows and worked as an interior designer. So mine are a little bit hard to explain. They're kind of reminiscent of Rorschach blocks.
Yes. Ink blocks, yeah.
And they also
but they're colorful.
Yeah, they also have some sense of a specimen. I think you have to see, but they're very complex. I do them. I paint and draw on paper. With acrylics and enamel and oil and pen and ink, and then I collage that along with other things together, and then it's mounted on very heavy watercolor paper, and then I paint and draw on that watercolor paper. That's what I'm doing now. I also have another series with just our abstract oil paints that I'm working on. It's hard to explain art unless you look.
Yeah. So we'll show it. We'll show some of your artwork.
Great.
I think our viewers would love to see it.
Great. Great.
What is the significance of art for you?
wow, the significance.
Why do human beings create art?
It's an extension of dreaming, I think. I think it comes from that same place as dreaming. Like when I'll dream extremely detailed worlds that are much more detailed and fantastical than any out-of-the-body experience or psychedelic experience. And I'm just blown away with them. I might have like really vivid dreams, extraordinarily pleasurable, vivid dreams that relate a lot to my artwork. And boy, asking questions about art is like asking questions about music. It's great fun. Mm-hmm. It's great fun. It's great fun to have something come out of nothing. I would say that. And when you do something, you go like, where did that come from? And I've had my work shown and had reactions. So it comes out of somewhere. I think it's, if you're a visual person, you're synthesizing. Your senses are always synthesizing things. And they say amateurs borrow, professionals steal. So in art. So you're taking things from one another. I remember one of my earliest memories is drawing our family in kindergarten. We had to draw pictures of our family. Maybe it was even preschool. And I had mine, and I was next to Linda Steffens. And I thought, she's drawn hers better than me. Hers is a little better. And I'll never forget that, comparing your work, how skilled she was compared to me.
In drawing? In drawing.
That was a very early memory of mine, comparing myself to others.
Why does that memory stick out?
Because it's a great joy, but most artists are very critical. You're never pleased enough. Mm. You're always seeing where it could be just a little better, a little better, a little better. So artwork is never done. It's just abandoned, they say. You finally just say enough. It never feels complete. And I've heard that about novels too, that authors feel like it's never finished. It's just, you finally just say, all right, enough, it's abandoned. You can continue to edit and edit and edit.
Okay, well, Pamela, this has been a joy.
It's been a joy.
I'm delighted to be able to share you with the New Thinking Aloud audience.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll do it again sometime.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being such a wonderful host.
And thank you for being such a wonderful sister.
Oh, and thank you for being the perfect brother.
And thank you for being with us. Thank you.